disasters.
Towards ensuring zero fatality rate during the Unitide, Road Safety Police Transport Operators.
And on Good Morning Nigeria, today we focus on anti-corruption and sustainable development.
Now, the United Nations have declared corruption a major challenge to the MDG goals, particularly that of ending extreme poverty by 2030, which is meant to boost shared prosperity for the poorest 40% of people in developing countries of the world.
That's right, Rhoda. Now, despite progress made in the fight against corruption so far, but it's still a pressing global challenge. A UNDP report, UNDP of course standing for United Nations Development Program, estimates that funds lost through corruption are more than the estimated 10 trillion US dollars needed to eradicate poverty by the year 2030.
And that's very obvious, Kingsley, that corruption is already undermining social and economic development in every country it rears its head. And the fact is, no country, region or community is immune to corruption, which is why they say money lost to corruption is essentially development denied the most vulnerable people in the society.
Of course, that's one of the reasons why the United Nations Convention Against Corruption was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2003. And the intention, of course, is to provoke global action against corruption. And so far, the convention has been ratified by some 183 states. It obliges them to prevent and criminalize corruption in their countries, promote international cooperation, recover and return stolen assets, as well as improve technical assistance and information exchange in both the private and public sectors of the fight against corruption.
Well, 16 years since the Convention Against Corruption was ratified, the global action against corruption has, of course, met its share of challenges. The UNDP now advancing the anti-corruption agenda by providing a global framework to fight corruption in coalition with the 2030 agenda, which highlights the importance of promoting transparency, accountability and anti-corruption for sustainable development for the achievement of all the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
All right, one question that arises is, what can anti-corruption institutions do to reduce the spread of corruption in the public and private sectors? And how does corruption ultimately affect the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals? And also, how successful has the fight against cross-border corruption been, particularly in the recovery of stolen assets?
Well, Kingsley, we have anti-corruption experts and advocates in the studio to give us insight into these issues and more in the course of this program. This is Good Morning Nigeria. We're reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority from our studios, our headquarters here in Abuja. We thank you very much for joining us this beautiful Wednesday morning. I'm Rhoda Anona.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I also join my colleague to welcome you to the program, in the course of which we have our regular complimentary segments. And these include newspaper review, business, and others. So now, let's take the news highlights with our colleague, Chibobi Watananji. Good morning, Chibobi.
Hello, Kingsley and Rhoda. Good to see you this morning. Good morning, Nigeria. And here is the morning news. President Muhammadu Buhari is in Egypt with other African leaders for talks at the Aswan Forum designed to set an agenda for sustainable peace and development in Africa. The forum, which begins today, is an initiative by the AU chairman and president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, to address the interconnections between peace and development in Africa, aimed at promoting Africa-led solutions through strengthening policies and practices.
He has identified for his administration in Nigeria, number one usually is to secure the country, then followed by to revive the economy, and then to fight corruption. But usually the first one is security, because it says that you can run a country or an institution or an organization that you have not secured.
Now, in a world increasingly plagued by activities of the agents of intolerance and religious extremism, it will take acts of deep humility and personal sacrifice, especially by leaders across board, in order to change the disposition to hate and prejudice. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo said this in Abu Dhabi at the opening session of the 6th Assembly of the Forum for Promoting Peace, organized by the government of the United Arab Emirates. The burden, as the Vice President noted, rests squarely on leaders, especially religious and political leaders, and the elite in nations and communities.
But this is the responsibility that leadership places upon those of us who are religious leaders, those of us who are political leaders in our countries. The responsibility of leadership is not just words, it is not just text, it is not just laws. The responsibility of leadership is self-sacrifice, is putting our reputation on the line, is putting our words into action.
And now to other issues, as President Muhammadu Buhari is requesting the Senate to confirm 14 nominees as chairman and members of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. The legislators at Tuesday's plenary passed the Food Security Bill at second reading.
I'm pleased to forward for confirmation by the Senate the underlisted names of nominees as the chairman and members of the Federal Inland Revenue Service.
And still with the National Assembly, the President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, said the 9th National Assembly would not hesitate to investigate the usage of the Natural Resources Development Fund following alleged infractions in its management. Now, this was at the round-table discussion on the need for continuous implementation of policy reforms towards diversification of the Nigerian economy through the solid minerals sector held in Abuja.
I know the administration is trying to get Ajabuta back to life. That would be a fundamental feat for us in this country.
And in a related development, the House of Representatives has passed for second reading a bill for an act to alter the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria in order to make separate the office of the Attorney General of the Federation.
We need to insulate it from the vagaries and vicissitudes of political influence, so that the office can be independent.
Now to other issues, Nigeria joined the rest of the world to mark the International Day of Human Rights. This year's event focuses on youth standing up for human rights.
So for us as Nigerians, I believe it's important that we continue to support institutions like this and also continue to hold leaders accountable based on the laws of the land and also the diktats of our constitution.
We have so much to celebrate as a country, despite the incidents of Chore and El Zakizaki and others. But as a country, we are still free to talk about them. We are still free to take measures to deal with them.
And President Muhammadu Buhari is calling for a strong multilateral cooperation for urgent intervention and action in the protection of island nations as well as those African countries threatened by environmental disasters associated with climate change. Now, this was in a message at the Nairobi Summit of the African, Caribbean and Pacific Group.
Challenging to multilateralism, a number of countries, big powerful countries, doing things unilaterally. There's not as much support for some of the, multilateral initiatives, climate change and others, the UN, peacekeeping.
The Federal Road Safety Corps is having serious discussions with land transport operators in Abuja to ensure zero fatality rate during the Yuletide. And those are the news highlights now. And Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Rob after this break. Stay with us.
You are welcome back, and in case you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We are live. Well, one of our complimentary segments, that's the business news. Nigeria's tax laws to undergo review as experts advocate technological support for industrial revolution. For more on this and other stories in our business news segment, let's join Kunle Adeyeye.
The federal government is in the process of reviewing the country's tax laws with a view to meeting global best practices as well as block leakages. And key players in tax administration management in Nigeria are having their input in the tax laws proposed by the Nigerian Law Reform Commission.
The tax regime in Nigeria is so obsolete and inadequate to the extent that by World Bank report of 2012, our tax to GDP ratio as a country of 180 million people is just 2%.
Also, the Commission proposed increase in the punishment provided in subsections of the Act, for example, Section 64, subsection 7, from 10,000 naira to 50,000 naira, and 6 months imprisonment to 2 years.
In another development, Professor Abdulrasheed Na'ala has premised Nigeria's quest for industrial revolution on technological backings. He said technological innovations are essential in the drive to revolutionize the agricultural sector of the nation's economy.
You can never go wrong with technology. Technology does not just make things easy in terms of production, but also able to multiply so many levels. So we're hoping that technology in agriculture will lead to what we always need in this country, which is agri-mechanization.
And next, details of Tuesday's tradings on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Business News. I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Many thanks, Kunle, for the business package on Morning Nigeria. Next for us is newspaper review.
Our regular newspaper reviewer, Bayo Toyobi, is in the studio this morning to give more depth into our review. Bayo, good morning.
Good morning, Rhoda. Good morning, Kinsley.
Bayo, good
morning, Nigeria.
All right. Let's begin by taking a look at the Daily Trust newspaper. Daily Trust newspaper, below the nameplate, court restrains Gandhi from creating Council of Chiefs. Details on page 4. Banira out as Icon gets new chairman. That's on page 3. Bafarawa and Wako trade words at Sokoto Airport, page 13. This story says, borrowing inevitable, federal government tells lawmakers. No new request, that's according to the DMO, and tread with caution, according to experts. And then right at the foot of the front page there, Senate probes CBN over 20 trillion naira unremitted stamp duties. That's page 6. EU and Amnesty International say violence growing in Nigeria, and police parade 6 suspects over killing of women leader. That's the Kogi PDP women leader. Details on page 36. Rhoda.
All right, let's quickly take the blueprint. On the blueprint, just beside the nameplate, we have it there. Disco's increased revenue collection by 43 billion naira in 1 year. So that's a statement credited to the director. And border closure will ensure more transparency and integrity, and that's by the auto marketers. Also, below the nameplate now, why Nigeria still needs $22.7 billion loan, says Minister, and Nigeria will be polio-free in 2020. The big story on the blueprint this morning, show arrest, rearrest drama could be an attempt to ridicule Buhari, says federal government. Show arrest, rearrest drama could be an attempt to ridicule Buhari, says federal government reps to probe court. There recommends multilateral approach against terrorism. That's on page 6. 1.4 million Ekiti residents still practice open defecation, says UNICEF. That's on page 9. Katsina indigenes into livestock production, says Masari, and insurgency victims to receive VSF agric input. That's on page 5. Those are the stories trending on the front page of the blueprint this morning. All right, Bio, let's begin.
Well, let's look at two critical stories. One about reforming the office of the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, proposed by the House of Representatives. The other is at the Senate, where positive initiative is being taken about revenue generation, and therefore they are looking at the issue of stamp duties. The Attorney General, a bill that's passed the first and second reading would attempt to separate the office of the Attorney General of the Federation from that of Minister of Justice. The majority leader in the House, majority whip who proposed the motion, Honorable Mohammed Mongunu, was speaking from experience. He says, being a former Commissioner of Justice and Attorney General of Borno State, he certainly emphasized that there is need to separate the responsibility of that office from its political influences. And he asserted that the powers of the Attorney General are judicial and should not be exposed to political influence. However, he recounts the development shown that the power of non-prosecute should also be isolated from political interference. He said an executive should feel free to make political consideration to appoint a minister or commissioner of justice, but the appointment for the office of the attorney should be professionally a career projection and should not be shielded from the influences of politics. That bill has passed the first and second reading, and it will face serious consideration at the House of Representatives. At the Senate, the non-remittance of stamp duties was the topic of concern, and an emotion that was raised by Senator Akinle Yerule and 41 co-sponsors is intended to improve the internally generated revenue situation of the federal government. The Central Bank of Nigeria in 2016 issued a circular directing all banks and financial institutions to charge 50 naira stamp duty on all lodgements on current account. And the Central Bank is alleged have revolved all efforts to remit to the federal government amounts totaling up to about 20 trillion that is meant stock at the Nigeria interbank settlement system to be paid into the federation account. The Senate has therefore empowered its committee to investigate this, and all it is each part of the initiative to ensure that the internally generated revenue of government is enhanced. You recall that it's tied to even the border closure. One of the critical issues of border closure was undermining the economy and also to shore up revenue generation. And the Board of Customs of Excise has been reporting that on the average, in fact, on the first month where the border was closed, they were turning in about 900 billion by way of revenue. So it is part of the wider initiative to boost internally generating revenue of government. The other story of concern is the issue of a fake doctor reported in Adamawa, 54-year-old Ibrahim Mohammed, who had a certificate of NAPTEC, which is equivalent of school certificate, but he had forged an MBBS certificate and a doctor's license. And guess what? He got employed in the medical service in Adamawa State and rose to become a principal medical officer. In the process, he had conducted about 500 major and minor surgeries, including cesarean sections. And the judge was very hard on him. He said, only God can imagine the number of persons you have harmed or killed. He has been sentenced to a series of imprisonment totaling up to 54 years and 6 months. But he is to spend 10 years because the sentences are to run concurrently.
There was a case, if you recall, some years ago, of also a fake doctor who was a staff of the Federal Ministry of Health here in Abuja.
Abuja, yes.
And indeed, he was a unionist. He was a unionist. I think he was of director level, whether assistant or deputy director. And I think it was his hotheadness in pursuing union matters that eventually revealed, his true identity. I think maybe the case went up for prosecution, but what the outcome was, no further reports on that. Now, let's look at the leadership newspaper. We already read the story from the Daily Trust. It says, Adamo replaces Banire as AMCON chairman. Court stops inauguration of Council of Chiefs. That's also on the front page of Daily Trust. 6 days after passage, National Assembly yet to transmit 2020 budget to President Muhammadu Buhari. Proceeds on recess tomorrow. And another headline there, $22.7 billion loan. That's the kicker. Every kobo borrowed will be judiciously used, as attributed to the federal government. Now, right at the foot of the front page, CBN to increase loan-to-deposit ratio to 70% in 2020. Kwara Assembly shuts out PDP member-elect. That's page 4. State of the Nation, Oshomole and Wike trade words at book launch. That's page 5. Oil workers back federal government or suspension of fuel supply to border towns. Page 2.
Well, let's look at the issue about the budget. The concern expressed by the leadership is the fact that the National Assembly, anytime from now, is likely to go on this end-of-year break. And as far as the budget is concerned, it's been passed since last week, and the ball is now in the court of the clerk of the National Assembly, who is supposed to do the documentation and communicate the bill appropriately to the executive. But yes, there is concern because the intention is to ensure that the budget cycle, January to December, is achieved. However, that has to be done when the bill goes to the presidency, and the president will also take a look at it. He has the option to assent immediately or withdraw his assent and point out areas that he thinks the National Assembly has to look at before he will assent. If, however, that is to be the case and the National Assembly is already in session, the fear expressed by leadership is that that procedure may now could be halted. But for the purposes of national emergency and to meet that exigency, the officers of the National Assembly, they have the prerogative to recall the National Assembly to look at it if such a development comes. But between now and 31st of December, we still have ample time for the budget 2020 to still meet the January to December budget cycle. Don't forget, the 2019 budget is still running, and it's supposed to lapse up to about May or June or thereabouts.
All right, Abaya, let's quickly take our editorial for this morning. Our editorial is on the Daily Sun. It's on page 15 of the Daily Sun, and it's actually titled "The Case for Electoral Offences Commission." 3 major bills designed to facilitate our elections were tabled and passed by the 8th National Assembly, but failed to win the assent of President Muhammadu Buhari. Some of them were presented to the President more than once, some more than twice. The President found reasons to decline. In some instances, he said it was due to poor drafting. In another, he felt the legislation was too close to the 2019 election and might confuse the electorate. Fire, what's all about?
Just very quickly draw attention to this human interest story. Lagos State government is to pass a law that will prohibit the keeping of dangerous pets. You recall, November 8th, there was a lion that was being kept somewhere in the Koi, and it had to be tranquilized. And so Lagos State says that law is to protect members of the public. There's even somebody who kept a python as a pet. The python refused to eat for days. And when he took it to the vet doctor, guess what the vet doctor told him? The python is fasting to be able to accommodate the pet keeper when he was ready to swallow. So that is the danger with some of these wild pets. Now, coming back to the editorial, the Electoral Offences Commission is what has come out of the CSO's situation room and the meeting with the Independent National Electoral Commission and all stakeholders. And everybody agrees that the best solution to the impunities that have ensued from the 2019 election is to have an Electoral Offences Commission. Because as it is now, INEC is in charge of elections, but INEC though is responsible for security for elections by using the police, INEC cannot apprehend, and it has to be the police that apprehend. But year in, year out, whenever there is elections and there are violations of the electoral processes, apparently people get away with the violations, which is always occasioned by politicians, political talks, and their cohorts. And therefore, the initiative here is that if we have an elections petition commissions tribunal, that will be the sole responsibility of holding everybody who violates electoral processes or undermines the electoral process during the election to be held accordingly accountable. But there is a challenge here. Whenever there is a problem, there is always a tendency to set up a commission to solve that problem. And the challenge of setting up a commission is that you now have to institute a huge bureaucracy, and it always becomes a vicious circle.
Actually, what I was going to say, that, you know, with everything you set up a commission, then that's a lot of money we're talking about.
We had problems with the police.
And some of these areas that have been taken care of by the law.
With traffic, and then we set up the DSS, we set up the FRS, and here we have established a separate bureaucracy, and the challenges are still there.
All right, Bayo, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Hopefully, we'll see you again tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We're taking a break now. When we come back, our focus this morning is on anti-corruption and sustainable development. We have experts here in the studio already, and they'll be speaking to the issue. So stay with us.
They swore an oath to serve our fatherland. And
we'll discuss other aspects of anti-corruption and the challenges for sustainable development. First, let's welcome Demola Bakare, who is the Deputy Commissioner in charge of International Cooperation at the ICPC. Mr. Bakare, pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning, Nigeria.
All right. Also here is Dr. Oliver Stope, is a country representative of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Dr. Stope, pleasure to have you here on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning.
And last but not the least, Adeyemi Adeniran is Director and Head of Department, Real Sector and Household Statistics at the National Bureau of Statistics. Pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning, thank you.
On the program. Now, well, let's begin first with Dr. Oliver Stope, who is representing the UN Office on Drugs and Crime in Nigeria. I mean, we keep talking about corruption, the scope and extent of it, and the steps that nations and indeed multilateral agencies, bilateral cooperation can seek to achieve by scaling down, if not altogether eliminating corruption. But it appears to be an intractable challenge, particularly in the developing world. Why is this so?
Well, the causes of corruption are, of course, multiple, and they are in a lot of parts of the world deeply entrenched, but I think we should also be very realistic that they affect every country. I think it was actually said by yourselves prior to this segment. Now, fighting against it is a long-term endeavor. I think we should be very realistic about what can be achieved over time. And I think this is exactly what the survey that was conducted by the National Bureau of Statistics with our support and the funding of the United Kingdom essentially confirms. Prevalence has dropped, but the drop is not yet that dramatic as we would like to see it. We have seen some very encouraging improvements as concerns individual agencies. And overall we have seen, I think, things that give us distinct hope for the future going forward. And it also gives us some good indications in terms of opportunities to further adjust, so to speak, our interventions, whether it is the national partners that are on the forefront of fighting corruption, whether it is the society as a whole, or whether it is, of course, also the international community, the UN, in terms of assisting as we, in the best way that we can in order to tackle the issue.
All right, thanks. So let's bring in the Director and Head of Department of Real Sector and Household Statistics from the National Bureau of Stats. Give us a sense of the survey that you conducted recently, the report of which was published. What are the high markers of that survey?
Thank you very much. The high points of the 2019 household corruption survey in Nigeria reflects that we have moved a step further in reducing the prevalence of corruption in the last 3 years from 2016 to 2019, dropping from 32% in 2016 to 30% in 2019. The average frequency of payment of bribe has not reduced as we observe in the prevalence of bribery itself. We also observed in the result that the percentage of adult Nigeria that came into contact with public officials increased more than what we have in 2016, which is an indication that more adult Nigerians are having more interaction with public officers and getting services done, which is a sign of development in the country when we have people going for services. We observe that the anti-corruption agencies are making improvement in reducing the prevalence of bribery among their officials across the country, the zones, and the states. This decrease in the prevalence was observed within the Nigerian police force, the custom, the immigration, the judges and magistrates, as well as prosecutors. We have a significant decrease in this within the agencies. We also have observed within the result that as observed in 2016, we still have the prevalence of corruption more in urban areas than we have in the rural area. The same thing goes for the increment between the male and the female counterpart.
All right, thank you very much, Adeyemi Adegniran. Let's bring in Ademola Bakare. You've listened to the statistics that he just gave. So far, since 2016, actually, there's been a reduction in, of course, corruption amongst certain agencies. What has been the major factor responsible for this? And from your angle, how give us a sense of how it's been from your agency in terms of, you know, the fight against corruption.
Thank you so much. What Oliver said earlier on is that the improvement is not as dramatic as we would have wanted, but it gives a sense of hope that, I mean, at least we are moving forward, not backward in the anti-corruption crusade. And from the prevalence of, bribery that he mentioned, we have been able to track the trend now. We know that there is a trend. 2016 report and 2019 report, some difference. And gives, like I said, that gives a sense of hope that we are doing the right thing that we're supposed to be doing. It's just for us to now put in more effort, especially in the area of communicating the anti-corruption crusade to the grassroots, as well as mainstreaming the anti-corruption principles into governance and service delivery as envisaged under the national anti-corruption strategy adopted since 2017. So it gives us a sense of direction in which we should be moving. The result from the survey should be able to drive policy, should be able to drive the strategy towards fighting corruption. It gives us the need, the urge to stop the hemorrhage, the need to use the anti-corruption, the fight against corruption to bring in more revenue so that the people can feel the impact of the anti-corruption crusade. People will own it when they begin to feel the impact of the anti-corruption crusade, and they will be able to join hands with the anti-corruption agencies to do a more deadlier blow to corruption in Nigeria.
Thank you. Let's return to Adeyemi Adeniro again, still on the outcome of the survey. Did the survey also indicate the contributory factors to this downward slide in the prevalence of corruption from 32%, as you said, to around about 30% now? What are the factors responsible for this decline?
Majorly, the factors that contributed to this decrease that we observed, one of them is the reforms, various kind of reforms put in the various agencies of anti-corruption that we are listed here. You know, if you remember, in the 2016 result, when we released it, the police and the judiciary actually wrote to the National Bureau of Statistics that the result does not reflect all kind of reforms and program and sensitization that have been given to their members of officials. But we told them that time that we are asking of from the citizens the experience they have with their officials in the last 1 year. So the reform they have as at that time might not have impact on what the citizen are still experiencing. Those reforms might have now manifested and then result into the reduction that we observed in these anti-corruption agencies. The other one is that the use of technology is now becoming in terms of surveillance. For instance, the customs, the immigration are using geospatial map or geospacing to monitor their officials at the border. So, which is can lead to improvement in the performance of the staff and subsequently lead to reduction in the prevalence of corruption among their members. In addition to that, the various program of government at the national also has impact on the reduction that we.
What are these? I mean, you said reforms. What kind of reforms have worked, and what kind of programs have worked? I mean, we do know, for instance, say for accounting purposes, IPPIS is a prevalent one. The TSA. So what exactly are you talking about? So that our viewers will have a clearer understanding to say, oh yeah, there's a nexus between the introduction of certain kinds of reforms and then the knock-on effect that we have seen with a slide in the prevalence of corruption.
Thank you. The reforms are carried out by the agencies, not actually by MBS. The agencies roll out different reforms. The police are having series of workshops for their officers and men from time to time. Exposing corrupt officers among their staff. All these are some of the program or reforms that the agencies are having. As you said, rightly said, the introduction of the TSA also reduce the prevalence that we observe nationally. Also, the introduction of e-payment, especially by custom, they are trying to do all their payment in e-format now, so that you have less contact with their officers when you are doing your this thing. Then the government program of ease of doing business is also making impact in the reduction that we observe over time.
From your agency, is there a number or is there an estimate to the amount of funds that is lost to corruption every year in Nigeria?
Yeah. In the 2016 result, it's about 400 billion naira that was lost due to effect of bribery. In this year result, we have 675 billion naira that is lost due to bribed that are paid by citizens.
So that means that there's an increase.
There is an increase. There is an increase in 2019 over 2016 in terms of, and this is where the issue of corruption. When we talk about bribery, the 675 billion, if you look at it, is equal to the sum of the 2018 budget for both health and education in the country. So if we are able to curb the menace of bribery at the lower level, that means we still be able to have enough funding for our social amenities.
How again, Dr. Stoppe, we're coming to you presently, but I'm just wondering, I mean, because we want to drill down into these numbers that the Bureau of Statistics has brought out. Now, how do you explain to our viewers that, okay, prevalence rate has dropped, but the quantum involved in corrupt practices has risen from 400 billion, you said, to about 600 plus billion. How do you explain that? Is it a function of inflation? Because we do know that, I mean, in 2016, the economy was already into recession. So what are the underlying factors in this to say quantum of money involved in corruption versus prevalence, coming down?
All right. The factor that can lead to that event is that the proportion of adult Nigerians that have contact with public officials substantially increased in 2019 over 2016. We have about 63% of adult Nigerians that had contact, at least one contact, with public officials in 2019, against 52% that was having contact in 2016. So with this increase in the number of contact rate that we have leads to, and bearing in mind that the average bribe that is paid within that period remains the same, but the number of people that have contact with the public officials has substantially increased. This is what led to the increment that we observe in the total amount of bribery that was paid.
All right, thanks, Dr. Stoppe. Now, still again, trying to make sense of these numbers. Adoniro explained to us a moment ago that reforms have been very impactful in the sense that, look, what the police is doing, what the general accounting system has also brought about, and what we have seen with some of the agencies like customs and immigration, the ease of doing business, and the fact that e-payments have been introduced, so there's less human contact. But here he is, in the latter part of his explanation, telling us that, okay, the number of Nigerians, the percentage of Nigerians has increased with contact with government officials, which is why we see a spike in the apparent spike, if you like, in the quantum of corruption money from 400 billion to 670 something billion. How do we make sense of this?
Well, first of all, I think we need to be very realistic about what the survey actually is measuring. What we are measuring predominantly is essentially low-value bribes. Low-value bribes that are being paid on a daily basis by citizens when they come into contact with the public sector at large. We will not capture the large-scale corruption, large-scale procurement contracts, large-scale embezzlement in government ministries. So that part of the corruption environment we cannot capture through a survey, a household survey of this type. That is the first important thing. So basically what we're measuring in terms of quantity is really what is being paid by Nigerians when they come into contact, whether it's the police, whether it's public utility officers, whether it's the health sector, teachers, and so on. Some people call it petty bribes. Now, the increase, I think he explained it very well, is exactly as he said. The prevalence rate, yes, has reduced a little bit, but overall the contact rate, the number of citizens in total and in percentage terms, has increased, and increased very significantly, from a little bit over 50% to over 60%. Yes. And that in itself basically has increased the number of contacts, therefore the number of times that bribes are being paid. And of course keep in mind that the frequency has remained essentially constant. Frequency, what do we mean by frequency? Frequency is essentially those people among the Nigerians who said, yes, I was in contact with a public officer, and yes, in that context I have paid a bribe. They said, well, during the past 12 months, how often did it happen? And actually we found out that of those Nigerians who do pay bribes, they pay on average 6 times over the period of 1 year. So you see, all of that in combination is basically responsible that overall the amount that is being paid in terms of these low-value bribes has actually increased.
But the happy news would lie in the slide in the prevalence rate.
Exactly.
Okay, and from your analysis of the survey outcome, what is there to further pursue to ensure that when next the survey is conducted, the numbers will be more salutary? In other words, we'll see a downward trend.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for raising this question. I think the beauty of this report, which is now available both on the NBS website as well as on the UNODC website, is that it gives us, because we have the possibility of comparing results of 2016 and results of 2019, really an opportunity to basically see to what extent ongoing efforts had made an impact. That is one side. And of course, what additional efforts or readjustments of efforts could help to make an even bigger impact. One of the things I think that the survey is telling us, I think relatively clearly, is that the issue of that most of the bribes are still being paid in cash. So increasing further the e-payment system in the various government systems would definitely reduce those opportunities and therefore reduce the number of bribes and the frequency of bribes with which bribes are being paid. Another issue I think that we see quite clearly is that the government efforts, many of the things that we have heard about, single treasury account, the enhancement of the prosecution rates, both by ICPC and EFCC, very dramatic increases that target really high-level officials and large-scale bribery. Those ones are absolutely crucial to deter these big-time embezzlements. They might less affect the sort of small-scale bribery that this survey is measuring. So I think the question that arises, what might be the opportunities to do in addition to what is already being done in order to make sure that we see a reduction not only in what the corruption we read about, you know, the governors, the ministries, high-level public officials, but also the corruption that the Nigerians feel every day in terms of their exposure of these kind of like petty forms of extortion, essentially.
All right, let's get the take of Demola Bakari on the survey.
Why we could argue, as they have done, that the quantum leap in the amount of bribe paid in 2019 against 2016 may be due to inflation and the increased rate of contact, with public officials. We look at it from another angle. Why do people really pay bribe? If you take one of the major reasons why people pay bribe, that add like 38% to speed off processes and procedures. When you have contact with the people, it may mean that people now demand quicker service from public officials that they are not getting. So they are willing to pay more bribe. It could also mean that because in order to avoid fines, people pay bribe when you commit an offense. It could also mean that people are becoming more lawless. Not doing the right thing, and they sort themselves out. It could also mean that, demand for the third, reason why people pay bribe is, demand for public utilities. It could mean that, that measures development. That demand for public utilities is on the increase. When people, you want DSTV, you want water, you want, electricity, and it's not readily available, then you are able to, you want to pay for it so that you can have it. It may be a sign of, development. Be that as it may, it has given us reason to now go back and sharpen our strategy to combat, all those things. The 5 pillars of the national strategy as in prevention, it means that we need to do more of prevention. E-payment, for instance, everybody, you carry your card in your wallet, and there is the demand for, bribe from you, and you cannot give cash with the official stake, you transferring, that can be traced. So it means that when we go e-payment, full e-payment, it may not be easy again for public officials to demand the kind of petty bribe that we are looking at.
Yeah, what we are seeing here, partly, again, if we're talking about petty bribes, at one aspect of it is, okay, people are demanding quicker services.
Yes.
What lies at the back of that is a public official who believes that unless he gets some gratification, he cannot do the job for which he is paid to do.
Yeah.
Now, before 1975 in this country, nobody saw that kind of behavior. So, but it has become entrenched. They say that your file is missing. You come, Dr. Stoppe, you come, your file is not available. Somebody say, well, for us to go and get this file, it's going to take a while. That doesn't require e-payment. And that will require public service reforms. Unfortunately, we've been hearing about public sector reforms, and nothing appears to be changing with regard to that. What is missing? Who takes it?
let me answer a guess. I will not want to subscribe to the fact that nothing is moving along that direction. So many things are happening, but it's not enough to contain what we are dealing with. So part of the national strategy again is the fact that ethical reorientation has become more, we are in need of it more than ever now. And that is another pillar of the national strategy. So we need to reorientate the minds of our people that public office is public trust. You are holding that in trust for the people. And when you deny them the service of your office, you deny, that trust. So ethical orientation is very, very important. And that is, that has actually informed what ICPC, for instance, is doing, collaborating with different institutions of government to bring, to deliver public service to Nigerians. Look at, for instance, we are collaborating with the Social Investment Office, for instance. The amount of money meant for the poor, the poorest of the poor. Some people find a way to take out of it. And in our collaboration, we've been able to, to discover, like somewhere in Kogi State, somebody was able to get like 60-something million naira for himself out of the money meant for that particular state under the social investment program. So we are collaborating effectively on that area so that this thing gets to the people without the public officials taking anything out of that. We are collaborating with National Orientation Agency too in order to get the message across. On our constituency project, for instance, we have started a project of ethical reorientation tags, my constituency, my project. When people now know that the project that they have been denied of are meant for them and not that of the sponsors, they will be able to demand of public officials to do what they must do.
Well, all right, thanks, Demola Bakari. I understand, I mean, your explanation is clear, but there is a psychological aspect to this. Yes. So that, because, again, based on the focus of the survey, we're talking about, you know, so-called petty corruption. Yeah. But by the time you aggregate the numbers, they become staggering, such as we have seen. Why do we have still on the scale that we have seen, based on people, on the respondents of the survey saying, okay, they had to pay bribes so many times in a year, for instance. Why do we still see this lingering quid pro quo? Look, I have a job to do. Do I need to demand a bribe from Dr. Stope before I get the job done? If I'm a cop on the beat, and you have committed an offense, I mean, from where he comes from and other places, there's no abeg, sir. Are you with me? So it's okay, you committed the offense, all right, you get a ticket. And then there's a follow-up. Not that, okay, you know, if we go station now, it could be a different story. Yeah. That's so. Why did the survey try to capture this aspect to see why it is still lingering?
I think one of the factors that we observed that still allowing that to happen was that the level of education of our people needs to be improved upon, because we observe in the data that those with higher education, even if they were asked to pay, majority of them refused to pay. So education is key. If you are able to increase the level of education, the literacy rate in the country, people will know their right and know the right of the officer that they are coming in contact with. We observe that because majority of the citizens live in the rural areas and they are more or less literate, there is brazen for the public officials to ask or demand for bribe, because we see that there is a direct request for citizens to pay bribe before services are rendered. So, and we observe that those that are literate, when they are asked to pay, majority of them refuse to pay more than those that are illiterate. So if you are able to improve our level of education in the country, it will make impact in that area.
Is it, Dr. Stopper, is it also probably the case that performance measurement appears to be unclear, say the public service? I mean, a civil servant wakes up and goes to work in the morning and then closes in the afternoon, say 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. There's no indication, there's no way to measure what value of work you have put in. So if you have a file, your file is on my desk, I put it in my drawer, you come and say, no, I haven't seen that file. There's no tracing mechanism. How many files I have cleared in the week, or how many issues I've been able to get off my desk, nobody measures it. So is it possible that in this value chain of service delivery in the public sector, that this is one loophole that people are still exploring?
I'm sure it is one of the contributing factors, but I want to get back actually to one issue and one question that you raised earlier on. I think it is very important to recognize that essentially the absolute majority of the data that we were able to collect confirms an overall positive trend. And let me just confront you with some data. First of all, for example, most of the bribes are still being paid upon a direct request by a public official, and they're being paid before the service is rendered or the negative action, like the issuing of a fine, is basically avoided. That has reduced. So public officials are essentially less likely today to be bold enough to request for a bribe. At the same time, the citizens' refusal rate has improved. From 16% of those that were confronted with a bribe in 2016 who said, no, I'm not paying, at least on one, to 19%. In some of the zones, the improvement was as dramatic, from 13 to 27%. Basically, almost a third of all the people that were confronted in, I think it was in the Northeast, essentially said, no, I'm not paying. So there is an immense opportunity here to learn across the states and to be encouraged by whatever is being done in those zones or states that show good results. The last thing, and that comes back to the issue of education. We have seen an improvement of attitudes among young people with regard to essentially considering corruption never as an acceptable practice. And this, I think, is very much due to the efforts of the anti-corruption agencies, together with the Ministry of Education, that have really worked extremely hard over the last couple of years. Mr. Demola was himself very much involved in that, in terms of introducing ethics and anti-corruption related content into the school curricula at primary and secondary. And we see, obviously, those kind of changes, they take time. We are having almost 100 million people essentially under the age of 18 that are somehow exposed to educational measures. So to reach all of them will take time, and to reach all of them effectively will take time. But we start to see some progress, and I think that is really something that we should build on, expand on, and be encouraged by.
Demola Bakari, tell us about this project.
Yeah, sometimes in 2009, the National Value Curriculum was developed. Okay. And the curriculum was now infused into 5 key subjects at the primary and secondary level, even up to teacher education level. And from 2009, I guess, they started implementing it. Teachers were trained and all sort of. But like he said, it will take time for it to mature. If we are witnessing increase in the quantum of bribe paid now, it could likely again be because other forms of corruption were measured this time around, unlike the 2016 survey. Nepotism, especially in recruitment. People, man no man, people get introduced by family or friend before they get employed, and some even they buy the job. That is on the increase. And another form of corruption that was thrown up in the survey is the issue of vote buying during elections. So the quantum of bribe being paid may increase because of these two key forms of corruption that were introduced in 2019 election. And that is to say again that our job as anti-corruption agencies have been cut out for us very well. We now know where to throw the searchlight. Again, the reward system. Why I agree with you with the fact that the performance measurement is somehow it needs another look. To take another look at the reward system. We all take actions against bad behavior, but we do not. The system do not until now reward good behavior. Somebody told a story. A custom officer, a rejected bribe of $1 million, and he was only decorated with a badge, given handshake. Suddenly, after 2 years, he was moved from the position he was, from the state he was, to another location. Unfortunately, the allowances due to him was never paid by the same service. Again, when he got to the new station, people started jeering at him. See your life. If you had taken the 1 million, you probably will have a house here in your new post. So the structure, the social infrastructure needed to support anti-corruption effort may not adequately.
That's a very important point that you have raised. There are 2 issues on the table now, plus others that we have discussed before. the infusion of anti-corruption issues in the school curriculum. That's one. But the second one also has to do with socio-cultural pressures as a source of lingering manifestation of corruption. What the story you just gave is widespread. I mean, there are social expectations, and they tie that up with the informality, largely, of aspects of the economy and things that need to be done. How much of this do you see, Dr. Stope, as being a causative factor or a push factor for petty corruption, if not also big-time corruption?
Well, one of the things that the survey does, and I'm not sure it fully answers your question, it looks at essentially the reasons for people not to report corruption, which is quite interesting because it somehow touches on those issues. At the moment, and that is one of the, I think, continuing weaknesses, if you want to call it like that, that we have seen, that the average citizen, when confronted with the request for payment of a bribe, might be quite ready and increasingly ready to refuse that request, but they're less likely to report that incident. And the reasons why people don't report is essentially, to a large extent still, that they feel corruption is such a common practice, nobody will care. Mm-hmm. And of course we need to really work on that specific aspect, because obviously unless we can get a whole of the effort to eradicate corruption, we will be able to have gains, but the sustainability of those gains will always be in jeopardy. So we need really to work on the general attitudes and the reduce essentially the acceptability of these kind of practices across the board.
Let's have your take on that, Mr. Adeniro, with regard to socio-cultural pressures. I mean, away from the survey that you did, and we all live in this environment, and the instances are clear. I mean, I'm sure people will tell you, are you the only one who is in the office? Why can't you do this for us?
Yeah. I think it has to do with our value orientation. People expect so much from you, even if you have not reached that position. And that's why in the survey, when we look at our recruitment process, we see that where interview or written exam, the formal way of recruiting is not the practice. The tendency is to have people paying bribe to get that job. Whereas in a situation where we have written test as well as a formal oral interview, we see that issue of man no man, friends, family play a vital role, because at that point you need to perform better for you to be recruited. So if you are in the position or among the panel that are recruiting, even if the candidate does not meet the requirement in the written test, they still expect that because this applicant knows you, you must be put the person to get that job. So there are pressures because people don't value what is good. If you go home with that $1 million that we are talking about, the custom, nobody in the family will ask, where did you get this money? The important thing to them is that you are able to give whenever they demand for money. So our ethical value has to be.
The very key issue, that's the issue of the reward system, which before now hasn't been a practice. Yeah. Where people who seem to actually not take such bribes, lately we're seeing them being honored and giving something in appreciation for what they have done, unlike what you'd have before, nothing, and by the time you go home.
That's also an important consideration, and that is why we observed significant difference between bribery in the private sector compared with what we have in the public sector. In the private sector, the rate of bribery is so very minimal, at its lowest ebb, because the staff at the private sector, whenever they perform better, I think the rewarding system at that sector is better than what we have at the public sector. So if we can also improve on the rewarding system at the public for public officials, probably it will also lead to reduction in taking.
I don't know. I was just wondering. I mean, when you say that the reward system in the private sector is perhaps more attractive than in the public sector, some persons are likely to question that. I wouldn't know whether that was part of your survey. Why am I saying this? It's a common argument that you hear, oh, private sector, they will pay better than the public sector, and that becomes a justification for some persons in the public sector to now insist on this quid pro quo. But which takes us back again to the measurement of productivity, say in the public sector. If you are in the private sector, you have a job to do. And if you don't do that job, you're on the street. And you have a supervisor who will say, look, where is that assignment you were supposed to turn in?
Or the number, who would measure how many files you've been able to treat today?
I think the government is really trying to address this issue. The National Planning Commission is engaging all MDAs to provide them with their key performance indicator. KPIs. And they have list of projects that they want to do, and give them when it will be done, the timing, and then the resources that we cost, and they are monitoring that on frequent basis. So if that is sustained, I think it will really help in making sure that the public sector also perform as expected.
Which brings us to another aspect. I mean, I'm sure the ICPC Commissioner can assist with this. You know, we've had reforms in the past, as we're talking about, and then, of course, latest reforms relating to financial transactions. But there was Servicom. Servicom was launched, and there was supposed to be a Servicom desk in virtually every MDA. Have we been able to assess whether or not that is still a relevant idea? Because part of Servicom was to drive this whole idea of key performance.
Yeah.
To say, look, you got a job to do, get that job done without any expectation beyond your legitimate earning.
Well, we said something about measuring performance just now. I do know that the public service is about to do something about the mechanism for measuring performance in the public sector. But that goes to my answer to your question on Servicom. Have we really been able to measure even the performance of that reform mechanism? We have not. We don't seem to follow through with our reforms, and that is very sad indeed. Coming to putting pressure on public officials, I could see in the result of the survey, when people were asked about the most important problems being faced by Nigeria, people fingered unemployment as number one, 20%, insecurity 16%, healthcare issue 15%, housing 9%, and corruption now beaten to the 5th position, unlike in 2016. But you could see that the first 4 are corruption related.
That's right.
So another way of saying that corruption is as relevant as it was in 2016, even now in 2019. And we look at it because people put pressure on public officials because of the poverty level. If you have your dignity to protect. So anti-corruption crusade should be geared towards ameliorating the poverty of the common people, making the anti-corruption to work for the people. Yeah. And that is the target of ICPC for now.
All right, thanks. Adeyemi, I'm going to come back to you. Now, is it possible for us to disaggregate the survey? Because sometimes when we talk about corruption in the public sector or in the public service, we just say government. There's federal government, state government and there's also local government. What does this survey cover? Because, for instance, I want you to bear this in mind in responding to my question. There is a general perception that local government system isn't working account of the emasculation by state governments.
Thank you. This survey of household corruption that we have conducted can give us results at the national, can give us robust results at zonal, as well as at state level. It cannot give us a good estimate at local government level because the survey was not designed to report at local government. The sample size that we have taken is only to give us a good estimate at state level, zonal level, as well as national. If you have to do at report it at local government, then we have to almost double the sample size that we have, and that has a lot of cost implication for the country. And this is why we are saying for us to be able to continue to measure properly the trend of corruption in the country, there is need to secure funding on a continuous basis for the National Bureau of Statistics to be able to continue to collect this data so that we can be able to feed back to government the performance, either in terms of improvement that we have seen now, so that government will also be able to sustain the policies, the program, to really making sure that we are reducing these incidents on a yearly basis.
All right, thank you very, very much. Well, we'll continue this conversation after the break, so stay with us.
This Saturday on the Premier League, Chelsea go head-to-head with AFC Bournemouth.
It's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We have some tweets that have come in from our viewers. We'll take those tweets very quickly and then return to our guests. This is coming from Mohammed Kabina. And it says, corruption must be minimized to actualize development. If the funds meant for development are diverted to private pockets, then development is jettisoned for corruption.
And this one is from Francis Obi. Francis Obi says, be very transparent in their government should be transparent in their dealings, pay workers' salary on time, imprison any head who fails to pay salaries on time, distribute resources equally to all the zones without, any form of politics. That way there will be sustainable development.
Chris Simeon has the next tweet. Says, corruption is the bane of our economic and sustainable development. Let's join the anti-corruption crusade and fight corruption in our land.
Ibrahim Moduaji says, how can EFCC enforce MDAs to comply with the Transparency Treasury Portal recently launched by the federal government? And how can Nigerians track budget spending published by MDAs on the portal and report suspicious spendings to EFCC? Okay, so they'll answer. I guess we'll answer that just after we take the tweets.
All right, Titus Mondenok. Government is trying in the fight against corruption, and we need to see more high-profile convictions and stiffer penalties to deter potential offenders. If we can get it right in fighting corruption, a lot of positive development will take place.
This one is from Joseph Dean, who says there's no doubt that corruption has hindered development. With the current reality, it's not yielding any fruitful results to sustain meaningful development. This government's corruption fight, of course, is working and has succeeded in, of course, decreasing corruption.
Now, Mutana Farouk says anti-corruption programs can be sustained through preventive and proactive measures by massive sensitization about the cancerous menace called corruption. Now, Eagle Eye should be focused on the activities of the NDAs because the tendency of secrecy is prevalent in those places.
And here with another tweet says, the prevalence of corruption in society today progresses from kindergarten level to undergraduate level. It has grossly been rooted in our societal veins. I sound not to be pessimistic, but corruption can't be eradicated completely from our society, but a lot can still be done.
I was just wondering, let's return to our guest. Well, the surveys tracked, prevalence and scope of corruption. Do we have responses with regard to what the respondents would like to see as part of the ways of diminishing the prevalence of corruption? Dr. Stope.
Well, one of the things that also Mr. Bakare mentioned before that I think is really essential, and I'm very glad that ICPC and I think also EFCC, actually the whole anti-corruption community is embracing increasingly, that it's very important that the benefits of the fight against corruption are starting to materialize in a very evident way for the average citizen. I think the focus has been very rightly and very strongly on reducing opportunities and pursuing large-scale corruption. I think we have seen some very encouraging high-level convictions recently. We have seen stiff penalties being imposed. We have seen very important strategic changes like the single treasury account and so on that have really reduced these opportunities, have tackled that large-scale corruption. But as I said before, what the citizen experiences forms their attitude and forms also their appreciation of what is being done. I'm actually very encouraged by the generally very positive feedback that the viewers have been given, because I think we need really to translate those benefits a little bit more for the citizens, to show them the relevance of the fight against corruption in their daily lives. And the good news is it's not so complicated, because one of the things that we found actually is that about 50% of all the bribes, a little bit more than 50% of all the bribes that are being collected in this country are essentially collected by two types of public officers. And if you are including another 5 types of officers, so a total of 7 types of public officers, you are essentially accounting for more than 80% of all the bribes that have been collected. That means if we would be focusing really in the coming 2 to 3 years on eradicating or reducing corruption in those services, it would make immediately a very strong difference in the lives of the people.
What are those services?
Well, the police, public utility, there's federal road safety, there is, I believe, the land registry, if I'm not mistaken. Tax, thank you very much, you have them in front of you. So these are the kind of services that have high contact rates, comparatively high contact rates with citizens, and that is of course important because, for example, there are services like the magistracy where it is very important for other reasons to fight corruption, but in terms of the contact rates, the relevance for the life of the citizens, it's health, it's education, it's security. That is the type of services they come into contact with.
I was going to ask you, Bakare, because Dr. Oliver Stolpe just made a very important point, and that's translating the gains of the corruption fight to the average Nigerian, so that they can see how important it is, what has been done so far. How do we translate that?
Yeah, the focus of ICPC and anti-corruption presently is geared towards prevention. But all of our strategy, in fact, indeed our programs, they are combination of prevention, enforcement, public engagement, and even ethical reorientation. Let me cite, for instance, the constituency project. When you track the project, you are able to inform the communities, the constituents, that the project is meant for them. They should help to track it. And we have made available our database. We have hotline that people can call in to ICPC and get information with regards to the constituency project in their constituents.
What's the hotline?
The hotline 0800-2255-4272.
We'll see if we can scroll that. That's because someone asked the question earlier. I said, how can the EFCC and ICPC enforce MDAs to comply with their transparency treasury portal recently launched by the government? And how can Nigerians track budget spending published by MDAs on their portals and report suspicious spendings to the ICPC or EFCC? That's from Ibrahim Moduaji.
So this particular hotline, 24 ours.
Okay.
People can get information. People can give us intelligence. Credible intelligence that we can work on.
Okay.
You will know the budget, the 2019 budget for zonal intervention projects are there. We have the database. You can call in to know whether money has been released for the particular budget, project approved for your constituency, and you will be able to do the necessary tracking for us.
Is that the number for the ICPC call center?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll see if we can scroll. We'll try to scroll it.
Okay.
I would like to raise this again. I wouldn't know whether it was, part of the questionnaire that was distributed to the respondents in trying to elicit information from them. And it has to do with perception. I'm sure that, I don't know how long Dr. Stope has been on his tour of duty here in Nigeria, but there are frequent references, sometimes misleading, that the big-time corruption is the reason why the country is in dire straits economically or in terms of development. And that there are references are usually made to politicians. You mentioned all classes of politicians, lawmakers, those who are in charge of the executive, and so on and so forth. Does this perception percolate down to the petty bribery and corruption that we find, so that those lower level officials also see this as part of their share of the cake, since the big time corruption activities are taking place upstairs?
Thank you. The survey is basically based on experience of citizens with public officials. But we also ask them about perception of the awareness as well as efficacy of the anti-corruption agencies. And in the result, we observe that the awareness about police is high, EFCC is high, ICPC has high awareness. But among the three, let me just take these three, EFCC and ICPC, when it comes to effectiveness, people believe that they are more effective in their operation than the percentage that we have for the police. So police has high awareness in terms of people knowing about them and what they do, but in terms of being effective in performing their duties, they have very low percentage in that, compared with EFCC and ICPC that has high percentage of people that they say that they are effective.
So I'm afraid that doesn't quite address the question that I raised. Maybe Bakare may come in here. We're just talking about why would a person receive a bribe from you to do his job? That's the perception I'm talking about. That public officer who sits there and then collects a bribe to do a job for which he's paid, which is the petty bribery that we're talking about, or a law enforcement officer who is on the beat to say, look, enforce the law rather than enrich yourself. Was the question raised, to say, look, okay, maybe the officer is thinking, look, since, I'm sorry, this is not intended to cast a slur on the lawmakers, but they mentioned all kinds of salaries and allowances that they get, that is where all the money is going to. They do not, does that petty official, that small-time official, see that as a justification for collecting the bribe?
There is tendency for people to justify whatever action they take, quite all right. It doesn't mean that the justification is okay. And I don't think that the survey actually
covered that. I raised this because ICPC, you talked about enlightenment, ethical reorientation, and that's why I framed it as a perception issue. Because the perception is not generally correct that every politician is corrupt, that every lawmaker is corrupt, that every governor is corrupt. But when you have that kind of widespread perception, then the lower level bribe takers will say, look, why not? This is my own...
It could be part of what may likely add to the next round of the survey to find out from the people that are experiencing this, what are the perception that they have that made this public official to be asking them to pay from their own perspective. It will not be easy to collect the data from the public official themselves to say, why are you collecting bribe from these people? But the people that are paying may be able to give us information on, because they interact before the bribes were paid. So they may be able to give us information on why they are demanding this bribe. So we may include it in the next edition, but presently we don't have information.
But because Kingsley, you're absolutely right. Because just as you said now, you might not be able to get the public official, but if you go on the street, you ask the average Nigerian, why would you collect bribe, or would you collect bribe? Yes, some people will tell you I would, and some of the reasons they'll give to you is, look, what I'm collecting is nothing as compared to that politician who's up there, who's collecting so much for
doing nothing.
For doing nothing. So those are some of the issues.
I think you can frame. I mean, in the survey, you can frame your question.
Yes, it might not really be the public official himself.
Yes,
because that's the perception you would get likely on the streets. If you ask the average person on the street why you would collect bribe, they'll tell you because of the public official.
And I think why that is a problem of attitude is equally the problem of what we communicate through our actions. If the anti-corruption crusade is reduced to entertainment, this sporadic arrest and whatever, that is the message you send to the public. I am not saying that enforcement is wrong. In fact, it is very critical. But how does the media communicate the enforcement? If you communicate it, 20 billion stolen. If you do not follow it down with the cost, the opportunity cost of that something, you may have sent wrong signal to average Nigerian. So we need to do a whole lot about what we communicate through our.
I was just going to bring Dr. Stope. I mean, there are cultural differences, and anthropologists would advise, the basis of cultural relativity, that what is practiced in some other culture, it's not necessarily bad if viewed against other cultures. But the socio-cultural perspective to all of this, is there a sense in which our conspicuous consumption, if not ostentation, is a driver of some of these things that we see? Everybody wants to be like the Joneses.
Well, I'm certainly not qualified to answer that specific question. But I think what is important is that there are some aspects that the survey does cover, and that I think give you to some extent some hints in that direction. First of all, we do ask the question about to what extent the respondents to the survey actually feel that corrupt practices under certain circumstances are acceptable. And while the majority of Nigerians feel quite strongly that corruption is never acceptable, there's still around 30% that under certain circumstances consider corruption an acceptable practice. And I think that already goes into the direction of what you're hinting to. And we need obviously to work on those 30% in order to reduce that attitude. Another issue that we found is that when it comes to reporting of corruption, those ones that went on actually to report corruption, even though it's a very small percentage, quite a large number of them told us that somehow they were essentially discouraged from reporting. That can have multiple forms. People are saying, don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. It's never basically officially recorded. The action that is being taken is not transparent, neither to the complainant nor actually to the service as a whole. So if I'm a public servant and I observe a certain level of corruption around me, but I never get to see any action being visibly taken, even if it should be taking place, obviously I get the impression this is fair game. And then we have, of course, very importantly, the issue of public sector recruitment. Because obviously, the moment that someone enters the system, and as we have seen, almost half of the people that claim to have entered the system over the last 3 years said that they either resorted to bribery or resorted to some form of nepotism, that they are right from the start in a certain way conditioned by this very first experience of entering the service itself. So I think there's a lot of small indicators that we give us very practical hints towards what we should be focusing our attention as we go forward.
That's right. That's a very valuable point that you have also raised now with regard to what needs to be done. In general, I mean, again, to restate, we have seen a decline from the results of the survey and the prevalence of corruption from about 32% to about 30%, which means that some of the reforms instituted in some of the key agencies are working, but we do know that corruption is a major challenge for us, and of course, the mountain. We have to keep leveling and leveling and leveling until we get down to a level that I don't want to use the word tolerable, but minimized. Yes.
All right, Demola Bakari, let's get your closing thoughts. Moving forward, what are the things that you think we should be doing? Of course, just as Kingsley said, there's been a decline already. How do we further improve on this?
Yeah, in Nigeria, we have the benefit of being reviewed twice based on UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And we have the benefit of 2 surveys now. So we should be able to measure trend. And those results should be able to guide what we do henceforth. The Sustainable Development Goal, if it must be attained, it means that activities of anti-corruption agencies should be geared towards ameliorating the condition of our people.
Thank you. Dr. Stope, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, because oftentimes the sensation arising from the publication of certain kinds of survey can create misleading perceptions. And the surveys are different. I mean, this is one, and then from time to time you have Transparency International measurements and so on and so forth. So what is the symmetry between the outcome of this survey and, say, ratings by some other agencies such as Transparency International?
Well, they have nothing to do with each other. The TI index is an index that has some very strong weaknesses in terms of its reliability, its term of its updatedness, and of course the main issue is essentially perception-based. This survey is experience-based, and it tries really to see what is happening in the lives of the Nigerians to the extent that we are able to assess it. So we are also very open and straightforward about the limitations of the survey. As I said, we're capturing essentially low-value bribes. We're not capturing large-scale corruption. We're not making statements on this issue. And I think for me the most important part is for policymakers and the public at large, all the important stakeholders, to study the data, to give the data a chance in terms of actually challenging one's own preconceived notions, not just basically taking that part of the data that is confirming those and discarding the other as being irrelevant. Let's learn from it together. Let's shape our programs. We will certainly do so also at the UN, as we're basically an important, our main function is to help the anti-corruption community to move forward. And of course, to do all of that with a view to improving the conditions under which it becomes more achievable in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Oliver Stolpe, Country Representative, UN Office on Drugs and Crime. We thank you so much for your thoughts and time on the program this morning. And also